bloodthirsty battle against killer whales, monstrous attacks that drove the crew of a World War I submarine mad, and an orchestrated massacre by a group of sharks that killed more than 150 people. These are the 10 times the military fought sea beasts. Number 10. Meeting in the Gulf of Tonkin. Our starting point on this journey through the horrors of the ocean takes us to the Gulf of Tonkin during the Vietnam War in 1964. That year, the mighty American warship USS Maddox was on a clear offensive against the coast of this country. The advance guard had broke through the terrain. Throughout the day, more than 380 projectiles were fired, but when night fell, something unusual happened. Tony Newberry, a marine biologist and engineer in charge of sonar or underwater radar, identified anomalous activity in the depths at midnight. It was a dozen or so fast-moving objects coming dangerously close to the ship, but they weren't acting as you would expect an enemy torpedo to act. The objects were moving randomly, zigzagging one moment, but changing direction drastically in the next. Everything seemed to indicate that it was something indeterminable, but when the vessel was hit, they had no doubt that they were in danger. Apparently, the ship had been struck by a group of strange animals called pyrosomes. Pyrosomes are organisms made up of thousands of individuals that advance together, creating a powerful semi-transparent structure up to 60 feet in length. A perfectly coordinated attack by a pyrosome can cause extensive damage, and when the ship returned to base, they discovered it had come close to cracking in half and sinking completely off the coast of Vietnam. Number 9. The USS STEIN incident. War brings out the worst in human beings, but it seems to awaken the ocean's creepiest creatures from their slumber. At least this is the conclusion that the incident involving the U.S. Navy frigate USS STEIN seems to leave us with. The vessel was engaged in a special operation somewhere in the Pacific Ocean in 1978 when something caught the attention of the engineers. Apparently, the underwater threat identification system stopped working without explanation. For hours, those in charge tried to come up with a logical explanation, but there was no way to do so, so the frigate was forced to return to base, as its safety was at risk if it remained in the area without an optimal system. However, upon returning home, they discovered something chilling. The ship was covered with huge dents and gashes similar to what a hot knife might make in butter. Each of these gashes was approximately 4 feet long, and numerous teeth were found on the edges of the gashes, which had become embedded in the metal after the strange sea creature had tried to destroy the vessel. One of the Navy's biologists tried to investigate what had happened, and after multiple analysis, he managed to reconstruct the creature that could be behind this event. Apparently, the direct culprit could have been a squid over 150 feet long that weighed almost 2 tons. Of course, this conclusion seems very fanciful, but there are grounds to support it. Claws that belonged to those of a squid were extracted from the USS STEIN, but which, far from having the common dimensions of these marine animals, seems to be 3 times its size. Squids up to 40 feet in length have been found on other occasions, but there had never been a record of an attack similar to this one. Of course, this was only a theory of what could have happened. To this day, it remains impossible to decipher what attacked the vessel, but whatever creature did it, it's still out there, and woe betide the person who crosses its path again. Number 8. The Peril of the Sea. During World War II, the USS Marion took every move very seriously. Such was the meticulousness that they even analyzed the dangers that sharks could possess to their troops' maneuvers and outposts. In most cases, they dismissed them as an obstacle to their objectives. Sadly, they proved to be a torment to many, including Lieutenant Arthur George Reading and radio operator Everett Hardin Allman, 2 Army men who were forced to make a crash landing in the ocean. Within hours of drifting, the lieutenant's blood began to attract the ocean's most terrifying creatures, sharks. According to author, over the next 16 hours, the pair of friends faced the biggest battle of their lives. About 5 sharks tried to feed on their bodies, but they managed to evade them by swimming faster and using binoculars to get a good fix on the sharks. Sadly, the forces abandoned Arthur's body, and he was torn to pieces before his companion's eyes. Everett Hardin Allman would never forget that scene, nor would he ever find a single night when he wouldn't relive that fateful day. Number 7. Massacre on Open Sea. And while we're on the subject of sharks, we can't overlook one of the biggest massacres ever recorded in history of the U.S. military at the hands of the ocean creatures. It happened in 1945 when the battlecruiser USS Indianapolis was engaged in a decisive mission. Apparently, the ship was carrying enriched uranium to be used for the atomic bomb. Having accomplished this objective, its crew of 1,195 men was on its way to the Philippines when a Japanese submarine intercepted them. It took 12 minutes for the ship to sink, and nearly 300 people died instantly. However, the horror came hours later. The night of that chilling day was accompanied by a chilling number of hungry sharks that slaughtered the survivors throughout the early hours of the morning. When dawn broke, out of the 900 survivors of the Japanese attack, only 316 people remained. It's estimated that early that morning, the sharks wiped out more than 150 crew members of the USS Indianapolis. Number 6. Unknown weapons. Several of the major military powers on our planet have a wealth of secrets that they have rarely revealed to the public. However, sometimes there are leaks, and one of the most surprising reveals is that the military of many countries have trained numerous dolphins since the 1960s to be deadly weapons. Many of them roam freely in armed conflict zones and manage to detect divers. When they do, they pounce on the divers, remove their oxygen masks, and kill them. They have also been used as dexterous mine detectors and have even been fitted with weaponry such as harpoons on the sides of their bodies to annihilate any enemy that dives into the ocean. Numerous attacks of this style have been reported throughout history, and although it seemed impossible to believe, everything indicates that it is real. Very real. Number 5. Testimony to the horror. The following story shocked the British Army during World War I. According to the report, on April 30th, 1918, Gunther Kretsch, captain of a German submarine, was captured along with his crew by the warship HMS Coreopsis. Upon interrogation, they discovered something chilling. Both the captain and the passengers were out of their minds. They all maintained an absurd but chilling story that quickly became a reality. Apparently, the German submarine was attacked by a creepy sea monster that they described as having large horns, small eyes, and monstrous, lethal teeth. The beast was huge, almost the size of a U-boat, and the pressure of its bite managed to destroy much of the German ship. The British dragged the U-boat to their dock, and they were horrified after analyzing it. The metal showed powerful bites and deep gashes that confirmed the attack. The size of the teeth that had been marked on the iron showed that they were of a truly terrifying proportion and didn't belong to any creature that had been recorded to date. The case remained open and under investigation, but what really happened that afternoon of April 30th, 1918 was never elucidated. Number 4. Arctic Expedition. Another of the great attacks by sea creatures was suffered by the crew of a Russian exploration ship which was on an expedition to the Arctic Circle. But when they tried to approach one of the islands, they found a big obstacle blocking their way. In her logbook, Alexandra Land reported that the expedition was surprised by an enormous number of hungry bears that pounced on the poor crew members. Apparently, the lack of food on the island made these ferocious beasts see an incredible opportunity to ingest some fresh meat, and they quickly jumped into action. Something similar happened with walruses, these heavy animals that were tempted to attack the expeditionary visitors as soon as they set foot on their island. Hunger drives people crazy, but also animals, and this is a clear example of that. Number 3. Sabotage from the deep. What would you think if you learned that one of the biggest saboteurs of the 1970s U.S. nuclear submarines was a small group of 18-inch sharks? You'd probably think it was a fictional story, a bad invention of some screenwriter. But this was the reality faced by the Ohio-class submarines that made up the U.S. nuclear deterrent system in the 1970s. According to the reports of the time, in the midst of the Cold War, numerous anomalies began to occur with the submarine machinery for more than 3 years. Sometimes they were sporadic problems, other times radars were damaged, electricity was lost in sections of the submarine, or oil leaked. The problem became so worrying that a secret commission of the Navy had to intervene, as it was feared that there was a spy in the area. But the reality turned out to be quite different. The surprising saboteur was a group of cookie-cutter sharks which left a characteristic bite in the wiring of the submarines and in several internal areas, although this isn't how they managed to decipher the enigma. Apparently one day sailors in the area caught one of these small sharks, and when they opened it in half, they discovered that there were all kinds of mechanical compounds belonging to the submarines. Of course, this became one of their biggest headaches and an unprecedented attack in U.S. history. Number 2. Collateral damage. In 1982, Argentina was caught by surprise by a war for which it could hardly have been prepared. The Falklands War involved the mobilization of a large British fleet to the South Atlantic. The conflict escalated rapidly, and the country's powerful military technology succeeded in destroying the forces that opposed the change of government on the island. However, in the midst of the hostilities, something surprising happened. The anti-submarine frigate HMS Brilliant was in the area to protect the aircraft carriers from any attack by Argentine troops, but the radars began to detect an unexpected danger. The South Atlantic is full of huge whales, which were attracted by the surrounding commotion, unaware that the echo of their song confused the radars and forced the British troops to shoot at them. Dozens of whales were killed during all the British operation in the region. The carnage was so high that some native species were almost decimated, and despite reports, a number of citations that were annihilated by that date is unknown. Number 1. War with the Orcas. You're about to know one of the most unusual and strange chapters of the U.S. Navy, because when a small anti-submarine air squadron was sent to Iceland in 1956, none of its members imagined that it was to face the fearsome orca whales. You didn't mishear. Iceland requested support from the United States to deal with the savage killer whales, which had been attacking its shores for more than 2 years on a regular basis. Most of the attacks left numerous fatalities. These whales would emerge from the depths and swallow their victims alive without anyone being able to prevent them, at least until the Navy squadron arrived. Armed with 50 caliber machine guns, aviation rockets, and explosive charges, this small group waged a veritable war against the killer whales. For more than a month, the soldiers managed to kill dozens of killer whales. Their carcasses flooded the Icelandic coastline, and such was a massacre that some shore dwellers quickly felt sorry for the animals. It's undeniable that these kinds of events usually come as a surprise to most people. When we think of the U.S. military, we never imagine them murdering whales in cold blood, but sadly, this isn't the biggest bloodshed a military has ever done. In fact, this is hardly a small antidote when compared to the secrets hidden in these powerful military institutions. If you'd like to discover the truth to those words, then all you have to do is follow us through the next videos and see for yourself the reality that almost nobody knows.